Hey guys, tonight we are heading back into the dim glow of medieval evenings, where the hearth fire smolders low, shadows stretch long against uneven stone walls, and you're about to discover just how strange bedtime really was centuries ago. Imagine yourself trudging through a muddy village lane, the smell of wood smoke in the air, your body aching from hauling buckets, weaving cloth, or tilling a stubborn patch of earth. You're bone tired, but here's the thing. When you finally collapse into bed, don't expect a mattress that hugs your frame or memory foam that remembers your favorite sleeping position. No, you're staring at a straw pallet that pokes, creaks, and occasionally smells faintly of damp hay. Honestly, you probably won't survive this night without a few flea bites. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I always find it fascinating to imagine people in dozens of countries dozing off together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle inside a medieval cottage, ducking your head beneath low beams. The bed you're offered is a simple wooden frame, rough-hewn and creaky. On it lies a sack stuffed with straw or rushes gathered from the fields, which, if you're lucky, was changed out last month. If you're unlucky, you're essentially lying down on a collection of grass blades that are halfway to compost. Beneath your back, the lumps press in unfamiliar places, a reminder that comfort, in this time, is relative. Nobles, of course, had it easier. Their beds were elevated, sturdy, and carved with intricate designs, covered by mattresses stuffed with wool, feathers, or sometimes even down. You can almost picture yourself bouncing gently onto a noble's feather mattress, only to be shooed away for leaving muddy footprints. Historians still argue whether peasants slept directly on the floor more often than in bed frames. Some evidence suggests that the very poor made do with heaps of straw in corners, sometimes called threshing floors. Others point out that even modest cottages show signs of raised platforms or wooden frames, suggesting the desire to be off the ground was universal. What no one debates is the fact that mice and fleas were frequent companions. You may want to tuck your blanket tighter and ignore the scratching in the corner. Now picture the bedding itself. Linen sheets if you were wealthier, coarse wool if you were not. Blankets might be heavy, scratchy affairs that smelled faintly of lanolin. The wealthy added furs for warmth, especially during icy winters when even the castle walls seemed to breathe frost. You pull the covers up, only to find them oddly heavy. Comforting, perhaps, in the way modern weighted blankets are, though not by design. Here's a quirky tidbit. People often stuffed herbs such as lavender, rue, or mint into bedding to ward off pests and create a soothing aroma. You lie back, inhaling that faintly sweet scent, half comforted, half wondering if the mint was there for freshness or simply to disguise the smell of sweat-soaked wool. But let's not forget, beds were status symbols. A noble's four-poster bed was not just a place to rest, it was a throne of sleep, often moved from estate to estate as part of their traveling entourage. Curtains hung around the frame, both for warmth and privacy, making the bed into a private chamber within a chamber. You're tucked behind these drapes now, cocooned away from drafts and prying eyes, although you can still hear the shuffle of servants nearby, waiting in case their lord coughs or snores too loudly. In peasant homes, the line between bed and other furniture blurred. A bench by day could be a sleeping place at night. Children squeezed in wherever space allowed, sometimes on straw mats near the fire. Imagine the collective chorus of snores, the occasional cough, and the rhythmic breathing of livestock brought indoors for warmth. Your lullaby, in other words, was part family, part farmyard. The reality check. Medieval nights were cold and damp and noisy. Your mattress might be a breeding ground for lice, your blanket scratchier than a burlap sack, and your fellow sleepers a mix of family members, animals, and perhaps the odd unwelcome rodent. But for them, this was normal. You close your eyes and the rustle of straws becomes as ordinary as the buzz of an electric fan is to us now. And yet, despite the discomfort, the medieval bed was a place of respite. After hours of unrelenting labor, you'd stretch out and sink into whatever softness the straw provided. The muscles in your back loosen, your eyes grow heavy, and before you know it, you're drifting off in a world where the comfort of modern bedding is still centuries away. You wake up in the middle of the night, and here's the funny part. it isn't unusual. In fact, if you lived in medieval Europe, this was expected. People didn't sleep in one long stretch the way we do now. Instead, their nights were often divided into two neat parcels of rest, first sleep and second sleep. You blink into the darkness, hear the crackle of embers, and realize you've just finished your first round of slumber. Congratulations, you're right on schedule. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep was universal across Europe, or more common in rural communities where candlelight was scarce. Some diaries and court records describe it casually, as though everyone knew that waking around midnight to putter, pray, or even visit neighbors was completely ordinary. You imagine rising groggily, stretching your legs, and deciding whether to poke at the fire or simply stare into the gloom. During this interlude, sometimes an hour, sometimes two, people did a variety of quiet tasks. You might mend clothing by firelight, check on livestock, or even sneak in some whispered conversation with your spouse. And yes, certain marital activities were also slotted into this midnight pause, though I'll keep it polite here as this is bedtime storytelling, not medieval gossip hour. For others, the time was spiritual. Prayers, confessions, or dream interpretations filled the gap between sleeps. You, wrapped in a wool blanket, whisper a psalm under your breath, half hoping it shields you from the odd creak in the rafters. A quirky tidbit pops up from France in the 15th century, where medical texts advised that the time between first and second sleep was the healthiest moment to conceive children. Imagine your medieval doctor wagging a finger, insisting the body's humors were perfectly balanced at that midnight window. Whether true or not, it adds a strange sense of purpose to waking in the dark. Now think of the silence around you. The world outside is unnervingly still, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the hoot of an owl. Candlelight flickers, making shadows dance in corners. This in-between period, known to some as the Watch, carried both calm and unease. On one hand, it was quiet, private, even intimate. On the other hand, superstition thrived in these hours. Witches, demons, and wandering spirits were thought to be especially active after midnight. You shift nervously, deciding maybe staying in bed is safer. You eventually drift into your second sleep, a deeper, more restorative slumber that carries you until dawn. Scholars still debate whether the shift to consolidated 8-hour sleep in later centuries was due to artificial light, industrial schedules, or cultural changes in how people thought about nighttime. You, of course, feel the pull of second sleep settle in naturally, as though your body was designed for it. And here's a small modern joke. If segmented sleep came back in fashion, maybe your late night scrolling on your phone wouldn't feel so guilty. You just tell people, relax, it's my watch time. Suddenly, doom scrolling sounds like a medieval tradition. With dawn's first light, birds begin to chatter, and the second sleep gently releases you. In the medieval rhythm of life, this cycle wasn't broken, it was simply how the night flowed. 2 sleeps, 1 watch, and a lot of straw poking your back. You roll over, stretch, and smile faintly, realizing you're now perfectly synchronized with your long-gone medieval neighbors. You stir again, but this time it isn't the midnight watch that interrupts your dreams. It's the fact that you're not alone. You blink in the dark, shuffle slightly, and realize there's someone pressed against your arm, another against your leg, and maybe even a stranger breathing a little too close to your ear. Welcome to the medieval custom of shared sleeping, where privacy was more luxury than expectation. In peasant households, the entire family often piled into one bed or onto shared pallets. Children were tucked between parents, siblings squeezed in like sardines, and sometimes even grandparents claimed a spot if space allowed. You picture yourself trying to roll over, but instead they're encountering an elbow, a knee, and possibly the damp nose of the family dog, who has claimed the foot of the bed. Everyone's body heat blends together into one big human radiator. It's cozy, yes, but also a little suffocating. Travel was even more intimate. At roadside inns, beds were rented by the space, not necessarily by the room. You could find yourself sliding beneath the covers next to strangers you'd never met before. Imagine tucking in, turning your head, and murmuring, "So, what brings you to Canterbury?" while hoping your bedmate doesn't snore like a blacksmith's bellows. Some records mention that in crowded inns, 2 or 3 travelers would sleep together simply because beds were scarce. You'd wake in the morning with new acquaintances, whether you wanted them or not. Historians still argue whether travelers preferred this arrangement or simply tolerated it as necessity. Evidence suggests that in some regions, bed sharing was seen as perfectly normal, even expected. Elsewhere, wealthier travelers demanded private space whenever possible. For the poor, however, sharing warmth meant survival on cold nights, so complaining wasn't exactly an option. A quirky detail comes from 16th century England, where the phrase, "to hit the hay," might have had literal origins. Guests sometimes shook out the shared straw bedding before settling in, hoping to dislodge bugs and redistribute lumps. You imagine giving the straw a vigorous smack, sneezing as dust rises, and then crawling in beside your new sleep partner who might still be wearing their boots. Nobles weren't entirely immune either. Even in castles, servants often slept at the foot of their lord's bed, ready to wake if called upon. You drift in and out of dreams with the faint sense of being watched, or worse, snored at from the corner. It's oddly comforting, though, to know that the medieval world saw sleep less as a solitary act and more as a communal ritual. Of course, privacy concerns lingered. Curtains around noble beds, which we'll encounter more later, serve not just to block drafts, but also to create the illusion of solitude. You, however, lying shoulder to shoulder with your fellow traveler, have no such luxury. When they roll over and mumble in their sleep, you roll your eyes, sigh, and tell yourself this is all part of the journey. And if you think today's shared dorm hostels are noisy, just imagine the chorus here. Wheezing, coughing, muttering, the occasional sleep talker reciting prayers mid-dream. Add in the distant sound of pigs snuffling outside the window, and you've got yourself a lullaby unlike any Spotify playlist. So you shift again, accept the warmth of bodies pressed beside you, and surrender to the rhythm of communal slumber. After all, in a world where life is lived together, working, eating, praying, why should sleep be any different? You wake again, not because someone elbowed you in the ribs this time, but because a draft slips across your cheek like a cold finger. You shiver and reach for the nearest curtain. Not a window curtain, but the heavy cloth that hangs around the bed itself. In the medieval world, bed curtains were a lifesaver, and you tug them shut with a satisfying swoosh. Now you're swaddled in your own tiny cocoon, a fabric fortress against the chill. These curtains weren't just about keeping warm. In houses where multiple people slept in the same room, they offered the rare luxury of privacy. Imagine yourself drawing them closed, shutting out not only the icy air, but also the curious glances of your fellow sleepers. Suddenly, the creaking cottage feels a little more like a personal chamber. Noble families went all out with this design. Four-poster beds became showcases of wealth, draped in rich velvets or tapestries embroidered with family crests. You, slipping behind them, feel like royalty, even if you're just hiding from the snoring cousin 2 feet away. And yes, curtains helped muffle the sound of others as well. Not perfectly, of course, but enough that you could pretend your neighbor's thunderous snorts were just a faraway card on cobblestones. Historians still argue whether these curtains were primarily for warmth or for status display. Some say they were practical shields against drafty stone walls, while others insist they were as much about showing off wealth as they were about sleep. Either way, you're grateful for the layers of fabric that transform a bed into a miniature chamber. Here's a quirky detail. In some wealthy households, the bed curtains themselves were so valuable they were passed down as heirlooms. You can picture a solemn medieval lawyer scribbling into a will, "To my eldest daughter, the red damask curtains of my bed, with fringe intact." You chuckle, imagining today's equivalent, maybe leaving someone a prized set of blackout drapes from IKEA. But for peasants, curtains were rare. Instead, they might improvise with rough wool blankets or reed mats hung around sleeping spaces, anything to block the cold. You duck beneath such a makeshift divider, its edges frayed, but even the illusion of privacy feels soothing. It's amazing how a simple fabric barrier can trick your mind into peace. In monasteries, where rows of monks slept in open dormitories, curtains were forbidden to discourage indulgence and secrecy. You imagine lying there, eyes squeezed shut, trying not to notice Brother Thomas twitching in his dreams, while wishing desperately for a scrap of cloth to separate you from the world. The reality was that bed curtains created a microclimate. The warmth of your body was trapped in a small enclosed space, making it feel like a cozy den. You breathe deeply and feel the air grow slightly warmer. your own exhalations softening the chill. It's not luxury in our modern sense, but it's effective. So you settle in, draw the curtains tighter, and let the outside world fade into muffled shadows. Whether they were prized possessions or humble improvisations, these swathes of cloth turn the medieval bed from a simple piece of furniture into a little sanctuary, half cocoon, half stage set. You open your eyes to find yourself not in a noble hall with embroidered curtains, but in a smoky peasant cottage, where the definition of bedroom is generous at best. The floor beneath you is hard-packed earth, and your straw pallet is squeezed between the hearth and the wall. The fire has burned low, leaving behind the faint orange glow of embers that crackle softly, giving just enough light to trace the outlines of your neighbors huddled nearby. In this cottage, beds aren't private thrones. They're community platforms. The family's pallet is broad and flat, stuffed with rushes, reeds, or straw, and stretched across wooden boards. You shift slightly, and a chicken flutters nearby, roosting on the crossbeam, its claws scratching faintly. Yes, livestock often slept indoors with peasants during the cold months. Cows, sheep, or goats added warmth to the room, their steady breathing mingling with the snuffles of children. You pull your blanket tighter, trying to decide which is the loudest, Uncle's snores or the goat's occasional bleat. The walls are wattle and daub, thin and uneven, so every gust of night wind squeezes through like a ghostly draft. That hearth fire is your only real defense, so you shuffle closer, stretching your toes toward the ashes and hoping for a stray ember of heat. The air smells of smoke, damp wool, and hay, harsh but oddly comforting. You think of it as medieval aromatherapy, eau de goat mixed with eau de pit fire. Historians still argue whether animals inside were a deliberate choice for warmth, or simply a lack of separation in cramped cottages. Some suggest peasants welcomed the extra body heat. Others argue it was necessity, not preference. Either way, you're lying there now with a cow shifting nearby and you decide not to complain. The warmth is real. Here's a quirky tidbit. Rushes on the floor and in bedding were sometimes changed only a few times a year. By then, layers of food scraps and spilled ale and general dirt built up, creating a sort of mulch underfoot. You roll over, poke at the bedding, and wrinkle your nose at the faint smell of mildew. Still, at least the top layer feels dry enough. Children often doubled as alarm clocks, waking early to tend animals or fetch water. You sigh as one tiny body clambers over yours, feet cold as ice, and scampers toward the door. Sleep in a peasant's cottage was always fragile, punctuated by chores, coughing, or sudden noises from outside. Yet somehow families adapted, drifting in and out of slumber, their bodies attuned to rhythms of work and firelight. And despite the discomfort, there's a strange coziness to the scene. Everyone is close together, breathing the same smoky air, lulled by the crackling hearth and the rustle of straw. The room is alive with sound, but those sounds are familiar, part of the fabric of a daily life. You can almost trick yourself into thinking the bleating goat is just another snore. So you close your eyes, draw your thin woolen blanket around your shoulders, and accept the roughness of this peasant's bed. It may not be comfortable by modern standards, but within its smoky, crowded warmth lies the shared heart of medieval family life. You roll over, restless, straw rustling beneath you, and wonder what medieval people did when they couldn't fall asleep. You're not alone. Insomnia isn't just a modern invention. They had their own arsenal of remedies, some charming, some questionable, and some downright strange. Tonight, you reach for one of these old cures, hoping it soothes your wandering mind. The most common remedy was herbal. People tucked sprigs of lavender, chamomile, or valerian under pillows. Their scents believed to calm both body and spirit. You imagine breathing in the faint sweetness of lavender, mingling with the smokier scents of your cottage, and feeling your eyelids droop just a little heavier. Some even stuffed dried herbs directly into mattresses, which probably made lying down feel like resting in a field of wildflowers, assuming you ignored the fleas. For those with access to wine, a spiced cup before bed was popular. Warm, diluted, and flavored with herbs like nutmeg or cinnamon, it worked much like our hot toddy or warm milk. You sipped carefully, feeling the heat slide down your throat, the spices prickling your tongue. Was it medicinal? Maybe. Was it effective? Absolutely. Only because a tipsy body falls asleep faster. Historians still argue whether this nightly drink was more about pleasure than health, but you can't deny its cozy effect. Then there were charms. People whispered rhymes or tied amulets to their wrists, believing sleep would come if they carried a token against restless spirits. You trace your fingers over a little pouch of herbs tied with twine, tucked beneath your shirt. Does it calm your nerves? Maybe. Or maybe it just reminds you that someone cared enough to give it to you. A quirky tidbit. In some medical texts, physicians recommended eating lettuce before bed. Yes, lettuce. The cool, watery leaves were thought to calm excess heat in the body's humors, which supposedly caused sleeplessness. Picture yourself crunching noisily through a salad by firelight, while your neighbors wonder why you're raiding the garden at midnight. But not every cure was gentle. Some suggested bloodletting for chronic insomnia, believing it would restore balance to overheated humors. You're relieved no one reaches for the lancet tonight. Others brewed concoctions laced with opium or henbane, potent, risky sedatives that could quiet both body and spirit a little too well. You take another sip of warm, spiced wine, and decide you'll stick with the lettuce trick. Sleep was also a spiritual matter. Many people prayed for restful nights, asking saints to intercede or reciting psalms until drowsiness came. The ritual of murmuring words in rhythm, candle flickering nearby, had its own hypnotic pull. You mouth the prayer softly, not certain if it's the faith or the familiarity that comforts you most. The reality check is that medieval sleep was never guaranteed. Cold drafts, noisy animals, illness, or gnawing hunger often interrupted rest. Yet with their herbs, charms, and rituals, people managed. You roll onto your side, blanket tucked to your chin, a faint trace of lavender filling your nose. Slowly, even in the smoky cottage with creaking beams, the remedies of the past begin to work, and your mind drifts towards sleep. Your eyes are heavy, but before sleep takes you fully, you remember that medieval nights weren't just physical battles with cold and fleas, they were spiritual contests too. As the fire flickers low, you whisper the prayers and rituals that countless men and women once muttered before slipping under their blankets. Religion wrapped around bedtime like an extra quilt, softening fears of the dark, while also reminding you that God was listening even as you snored. It was common to kneel at the edge of the bed, or pallet or straw heap, and say evening prayers aloud. You whisper the Pater Noster, your breath puffing small clouds in the cold. Some families recited psalms together, their voices blending with the crackle of the heart. Parents taught children to trace the sign of the cross before lying down, fingers brushing their foreheads in the half-light. It was protection as much as devotion, a spiritual shield against whatever lurked in shadows. Historians still argue whether these nighttime devotions were always heartfelt or often mechanical, done more from habit than passion. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, sometimes whispered sincerely, sometimes mumbled quickly with eyes already closing. But the rhythm itself, those same words night after night, would have worked like a lullaby, coaxing you toward slumber. A quirky detail. Certain saints became unofficial patrons of sleep. Saint Dymphna was invoked for troubled minds, while Saint Joseph was remembered for his angelic dream visions. Some even believed prayers to Mary helped chase away nightmares, her protective presence settling over the bed like a celestial blanket. You mumble a line to her now, comforted by the thought of unseen guardians. Beyond prayer, there were rituals meant to keep evil at bay. People placed crosses above doors, sprinkled holy water on bedding, or carried tiny relics to bed. Imagine clutching a tiny wooden cross, splinters pressing into your palm, while you drift towards sleep convinced you've outsmarted the devil. Some households even chalked blessings on the walls near their sleeping spaces, faint white lines glowing faintly in the firelight. And if you thought bedtime routines today can be strict, monasteries elevated it to art. Monks followed precise schedules of prayer before sleep, chanting compline together before filing into their dormitories. You walk with them, sandals whispering against stone floors, their voices echoing in plain song. Even in the silence afterward, the chant seems to hum in your chest, guiding you into stillness. Of course, not every night prayer was serene. Some people treated the darkness as a test, confessing sins, fearing death might arrive in their sleep, and preparing their souls just in case. You lie there, the idea tugging at your thoughts. What if you don't wake? Yet the comfort of ritual slowly dissolves that dread, replacing it with calm surrender. You sigh, Trace one last cross on your forehead and turn your face into the rough fabric of your pillow. Whatever restless dreams may come, you've stacked the odds in your favor, armed with whispered psalms, saintly names, and the belief that heaven is listening as you drift away, along your spine, not from the cold, but from the thought that you might not be alone. In the medieval world, nighttime was thick with superstitions, and you can't help but imagine witches, demons, or mischievous fairies crouching just beyond the reach of firelight. Sleep was never entirely safe. It was a threshold where the body relaxed, but the spirit felt exposed. People took these fears seriously. Witches were believed to ride at night, sometimes even stealing sleepers, causing nightmares by sitting on a person's chest. You inhale sharp and shallow, picturing that heavy pressure some describe as sleep paralysis. Today we call it science. Back then it was a sure sign of demonic meddling. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were more folklore or genuine terror, but one thing's certain. Medieval sleepers guarded themselves with charms, prayers, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. A quirky tidbit. In parts of Germany, people left an iron knife under their pillow, not for self-defense in our sense, but because iron was thought to repel evil spirits. You shift slightly, half amused, half comforted, imagining your dreams guarded by a rusty butter knife. In England, others tuck bread into bed, a symbol of Christ's body that supposedly frightened away lurking demons. You can practically smell the stale crust beneath the straw. Fairies were another worry. Unlike Disney's twinkling sprites, medieval fairies were tricksters, known to snatch sleepers into their twilight realms. You tighten your blanket, wondering if tonight is the night you wake up in some glowing other world, half asleep, half stolen. People scattered salt at doorways to keep fairies out, the crystals crunching faintly underfoot. Tonight, your imagination makes every creak sound like a tiny wing beat. The dead, too, were restless. Many believed ghosts wandered most freely in the hours after midnight. You picture the pale outline of a neighbor long buried, still circling the village, sighing through keyholes. No wonder prayers were muttered so fervently before sleep. With spirits roaming and fairies scheming, you'd cling to ritual like a lifeline. And yet, fear and humor mingled. Some joked about witches getting lost in chimneys, or fairies being fooled by spilled peas they had to count before mischief. You chuckle softly, the image of a tiny sprite stuck counting lentils on the floor like a medieval accountant easing your nerves. Still lying in the smoky dark, you feel that tug of unease. Shadows gather in corners, your mind filling them with whatever you most fear. Was it real? Was it imagination? Historians still debate whether these beliefs were literal or symbolic, but for the sleeper, it didn't matter. You grip your blanket, whisper another prayer, and wait for drowsiness to muffle the whisper of wings, the creak of floorboards, the sigh of the unseen. Finally, exhaustion bowls harder than fear. You close your eyes, surrendering to the night, reassured, if only slightly, that iron, salt, and prayer are enough to guard your dreams until dawn. You roll over, and the scratchy straw suddenly feels different, softer, warmer. When you open your eyes, you're no longer in a peasant's smoky cottage, but sprawled across a massive carved bed in a royal chamber. The walls are draped in tapestries, thick enough to muffle the wind howling outside, and the mattress beneath you is stuffed not with hay, but with feathers and wool. For once, you're not worried about goats snuffling at your feet, though you may have to contend with a servant snoring softly nearby, curled at the base of the bed. Royal bedrooms are spectacles as much as sanctuaries. The bed itself was a centerpiece, towering on carved posts and swathed in velvet or brocade curtains. You tug at the fabric and feel the weight of it, heavy as winter coats dyed in colors that scream wealth, deep crimson, indigo, or even gold thread. Nobles slept elevated, both literally and socially, their beds serving as symbols of rank. In some courts, important business even happened in bedchambers, audiences, petitions, or private councils. You can imagine your lord half reclined, yawning as some poor petitioner drones on about taxes. Historians still argue whether these bedchambers were truly restful or more ceremonial. The presence of attendants, courtiers, or guards blurred the line between private and public space. Sleep might have been warmer and softer, but hardly more private. You trying to doze feel the faint shuffle of a page adjusting the fire or a maid pouring spiced wine, and realize someone is always watching. A quirky tidbit. Some monarchs owned state beds used only for display, never actually slept in. They were stage props for grandeur, meant to awe visitors. Imagine dusting off a lavish bed that no one dares wrinkle, like a medieval version of the fancy couch in your grandmother's living room that nobody's allowed to sit on. You stretch luxuriously on the real bed, smug that you got past the velvet ropes. Still, the royal chamber had its own challenges. Drafts crept in through high stone windows, even with shutters closed. Fires roared in hearths, but vast halls were hard to heat, and smoke often lingered. You inhale, catching the mix of incense, perfume, and faint wood smoke, a fragrance both regal and slightly suffocating. And then there's the noise. Servants bustling, guards shifting their spears, the occasional rat scurrying across polished floors. Comfort improved, yes, but total peace remained elusive. You close your eyes anyway, sinking into down pillows, pretending that the distant murmurs are just another lullaby. Despite the interruptions, a royal bed was enviable. Compared to the lumpy straw of peasants, the cushioned curtain nest of a king or queen was another world entirely. You stretch again, letting the feathers cradle your tired body. For once, sleep feels indulgent, layered in silk sheets and shadowed by gold-threaded drapery. So you surrender to it, allowing the creak of carved wood, the shimmer of candlelight, and the hush of distant footsteps to rock you gently toward dreams. In this chamber, comfort and power intertwine, and you lie suspended between luxury and vigilance, drifting into slumber, fit for royalty. The royal chamber fades, and suddenly you're standing in a long stone hall lined with rows of wooden cots. The air is cold, and silence presses down so heavily you almost feel it in your chest. Welcome to a monastery dormitory where monks follow rules of sleep as carefully as they follow prayers. You shuffle to your place, careful not to let your sandals scrape too loudly against the flagstones. Here, there is no privacy. Beds, often simple wooden frames or pallets, are set side by side, without curtains or dividers. You lie down and pull a thin blanket over yourself, knowing every movement is visible to your brothers. Comfort isn't the point. Discipline is. Even turning over too often might earn a disapproving glance. Historians still argue whether all monastic orders were equally strict, but many had precise guidelines. When to go to bed, how to lie, when to rise, and even whether you could speak in the dormitory. The answer usually was no. The silence is broken only by the occasional cough or rustle of fabric. You hold your breath, afraid your own breathing is too loud. Then just as your eyes close, a bell tolls in the night. It echoes through the stone halls, summoning the monks to rise for prayer. You groan inwardly, drag yourself upright, and shuffle back into the chapel with the others. So much for uninterrupted sleep. A quirky tidbit. Some orders required monks to sleep in their habits, belts and all, so they could rise instantly for midnight prayers. You imagine trying to get comfortable with a rope digging into your waist, then smile wryly at the thought, so much for pajamas. And yet, there's a strange peace in this rhythm. Compline, the last prayer of the day, already set the tone for rest. Rising for vigils in the middle of the night feels jarring, but it ties sleep directly to devotion. You're not just resting, you're rehearsing eternity, alternating between earthly rest and heavenly praise. Still, exhaustion catches up with everyone. Some monks were known to nod off during prayers, heads bobbing gently as chants droned on. You feel your own eyelids droop during the monotone chant, half tempted to let sleep reclaim you even on the cold stone floor. Discipline might demand wakefulness, but the body always remembers its need for rest. You return to your cot, chilled but oddly calm. The stone walls no longer seem oppressive, they're steady, unchanging, like the rhythm of prayer and sleep itself. You curl onto your side, tug the blanket tighter, and drift off again, this time without dreams, carried by the silent company of brothers who share your discipline. It isn't comfort in the way of feather beds or straw pallets, but it is its own kind of rest. A sleep shaped by faith, by bells, and by the steady hum of centuries of voices whispering in the dark. You blink, and the quiet of the monastery dissolves into a very different kind of night. The air is thick with smoke and sweat. Laughter drifts from a tavern below, and you find yourself climbing into a creaky bed in a roadside inn. The mattress sags. The sheets are dubious at best, and the person already under the covers scoots just enough to give you a sliver of space. Welcome to medieval travel lodgings. Drafty, noisy, and occasionally unforgettable. Inns were essential for travelers, merchants hauling wares, pilgrims trudging toward shrines, or messengers carrying royal orders. Rooms were often shared with beds rented by the head. You climb in beside strangers, muttering a polite greeting and hoping no one decides to steal your boots while you sleep. Privacy? Forget it. You can smell your bedfellow's ale-soaked breath and hear someone in the corner negotiating loudly with fleas. Historians still argue whether the worst inns were exaggerated in travelers' tales or truly as grim as described. Chroniclers love to complain about bugs, bad food, and lumpy bedding, yet inns continue to thrive. Clearly the experience was tolerable, or at least better than sleeping outside. Tonight you resign yourself to the itchy straw, the squeaky frame, and the faint drip of water from a leaky roof. A quirky tidbit. Some inns offered haylofts as budget lodging. You picture yourself climbing a ladder into the rafters, nestling down among bales of hay, listening to horses shifting below. It's warm, cheap, and filled with the soothing smell of animals, though also the occasional sneeze-inducing dust storm. If you're unlucky, a rat scampers across your blanket, but at least the rent is fair. Back in the room, the atmosphere is anything but restful. Someone is singing downstairs, off-key but enthusiastic. A dice game clatters at the next table, and laughter erupts at every unlucky throw. You sigh, pull the thin sheet up to your chin, and try to block out the chaos. Every creak of the floorboards reminds you that walls are thin, and privacy is a luxury reserved for nobility. Still, travel inns had their charms. You might hear a story from a fellow pilgrim, trade gossip with a merchant, or pick up a tip about road conditions. Sleep becomes secondary to connection, and you smile faintly, realizing this noisy, crowded night might be remembered long after your aching back is forgotten. Eventually the noise dwindles. The dice clatter stops, the singing fades, and only the occasional groan of the building remains. You roll over, straw poking through the sheet, and close your eyes. It isn't comfortable, but it's shelter. You're warm, dry, and surrounded by people whose journeys overlap yours for a single night. Somehow, even in this chaos, drowsiness wins. You sigh, smile at the absurdity of it all, and let sleep carry you away. Morning light filters through cracks in the shutters, and you wake to the shuffle of small feet. Childhood sleep in the medieval world was nothing like the cozy nurseries we picture today. Instead, children tucked themselves wherever space allowed, curled on benches, sprawled across straw mats, or squeezed between parents and siblings on a shared pallet. Tonight, you find yourself wedged in the middle of such a cluster, a tiny elbow poking your ribs as a child snores softly at your side. Infants often slept in wooden cradles, gently rocked near the hearth. You can hear the creak of the cradle now, the mother humming softly, her lullaby mixing with the crackle of firewood. The tune is simple, soothing, and probably older than memory itself. But as soon as the child is a little older, the cradle disappears, and the child graduates to the crowded family bed. You roll slightly, trying not to crush a toddler's foot, and wonder if medieval parents ever truly got a night of undisturbed rest. Historians still argue whether children were considered miniature adults from birth, or whether medieval society gave them more leniency than we think. What's clear is that kids worked hard during the day, fetching water, tending animals, or helping with chores, so by nightfall they dropped into sleep quickly, wherever they landed. You look around the dim cottage and see little forms slumped against hearthstones, or curled up on rushes, utterly unbothered by smoke, noise, or goats shuffling nearby. A quirky tidbit. In some places, benches around the fire doubled as in children's beds. You picture a child rolling over in the night, thumping to the floor, and clambering back up without complaint. Others were tucked into trundle beds, low wooden frames on wheels that slid beneath adult beds during the day. You grin at the thought. It's basically medieval bunk beds minus the ladder and glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Children were also thought to be more vulnerable to spirits or illness in their sleep. Parents murmured our protective prayers over them, hung charms nearby, or sprinkled herbs around the bed. You reach out and adjust a child's blanket, noticing a sprig of rosemary tucked beneath the pillow, a fragrant little shield against the unseen. Despite the crowded conditions, there's a tenderness to these scenes. Families slept as one unit, bound together not just by walls but by warmth, touch, and sound. The soft weight of a child's head against your arm, the muffled giggle as siblings whisper before drifting off, even the inevitable kicks. All of it created a sense of belonging. So you settle back down, the air thick with smoke and lullabies, children pressed close on every side. It isn't solitude, but it is safety, comfort, and continuity. You close your eyes listening to the chorus of small snores and realize that for medieval families, sleep was less about perfect silence and more about being together. You stir, heart still thudding from a dream that felt far too real. Medieval nights were filled not just with sleep, but with visions that seemed to spill over from another world. Dreams weren't dismissed as random nonsense. They were messages, omens, warnings, or even glimpses of heaven and hell. You lie back, staring into the dark, replaying the strange symbols that paraded through your mind, wondering what they might mean. Many people believed that dreams were divine. Priests and scholars claimed God sent visions to instruct or correct. A farmer might dream of a withered field and wake convinced he needed to give more alms. A noblewoman might dream of jewels, interpreted as a sign of coming wealth or favor. You trace the images still flickering behind your eyelids, half convinced some higher power whispered to you in your sleep. But not all dreams were holy. Some were feared as demonic illusions. If you dreamed of monsters, grotesque figures, or even simple confusion, it could be seen as a trick of the devil. You roll over, tugging the blanket tighter, whispering a quick prayer, just in case. Historians still argue whether most people truly feared their nightmares or simply treated them as bothersome. Records show both. Earnest confessions of demonic visitations and casual jokes about eating too much cheese before bed. A quirky tidbit, medieval physicians thought dreams were tied to digestion. Eating heavy or spicy foods before sleep was believed to trigger strange visions. You smile faintly, realizing the late-night spiced wine you had earlier may be to blame for that dream of talking goats wearing crowns. Apparently medieval sleep science was closer to don't eat cabbage after dark. Dream books circulated widely, offering interpretations of common images. If you dreamed of water, it might mean a journey. If of fire, a warning of anger. If of birds, perhaps freedom or gossip. You imagine waking in a peasant cottage, describing your dream to family, and everyone nodding solemnly as though you just received a coded letter from heaven. Monks took dreams seriously, recording them in chronicles or interpreting them as moral lessons. Yet ordinary people treated them with a mix of awe and humor. Some dreams were dismissed, others clung to, and many retold around the fire as entertainment. You roll back over, remembering your own dream's strange details, debating whether it was divine, demonic, or just the cabbage talking. The line between waking and dreaming felt thinner back then. In a world filled with superstition, prayer, and mystery, sleep itself seemed like a doorway to something greater. You sigh, close your eyes again, and wonder if tonight's visions will carry warnings, blessings, or just another parade of absurd cabbage-fueled nonsense. You open your eyes again, and the first thing you notice is the light, or the lack of it. In the medieval world, sleep shifted with the seasons, bending to the rhythms of the sun and shadow. In winter, darkness stretched long, and people slept more, tucked beneath furs, or piled close to firelight. In summer, dawn broke early, roosters crowed relentlessly, and the fields demanded your body before you'd had quite enough rest. Tonight, you feel the tilt of that cycle, as though your body itself were tied to the turning of the year. During the long nights of winter, people might enjoy 12 to 14 hours in bed. Not all of that was deep sleep, of course. There were midnight wakings, whispered prayers, and restless stretches, but the dark insisted on rest. You imagine lying beneath heavy wool blankets, snow pressed against the shutters, and the silence broken only by the wind. Your body aches less from labor, if only because the fields are frozen and rest feels natural, even indulgent. Summer was another story, with daylight spilling across the sky before you'd even finished your second sleep. But work often began early. Farmers rose with the sun, pulling you from bed whether or not you felt ready. You squint at the brightness streaming through cracks in the shutters, groaning as if the sun itself were your nosy landlord demanding rent. Historians still argue whether people truly slept less in summer or simply shifted their schedules, napping in the heat of midday to balance the short nights. A quirky tidbit. In northern Europe, where daylight could stretch absurdly long in summer, people sometimes covered windows with painted boards or stuffed cracks with rags just to trick themselves into more sleep. You smile at the thought. It's the medieval version of blackout curtains, except instead of sleek fabric, you've got old tunics nailed to a frame. Seasonal rhythms also affected bedtime rituals. In winter, more candles and hearth fires were lit, filling rooms with flickering light and smoky warmth. In summer, people often relied on the last glow of twilight, stretching daylight as long as possible to save on costly candles. You stretch out now to the fading glow, realizing that sleep was always dictated by nature's clock, not yours. Even festivals and church calendars marked the seasons. During Lent, for instance, fasting and extra prayers often meant disrupted sleep, while long winter feasts encouraged drowsy indulgence late into the night. You chuckle softly, realizing medieval life had its own version of holiday jet lag, only with more mutton stew involved. So you close your eyes again, your body drifting with the ebb and flow of natural light. Winter or summer, dark or dawn, your sleep follows the slow pulse of the seasons. You're less in charge of your rest, and more a passenger on nature's turning wheel, lulled into slumber by the steady rhythm of the year itself. You stir, half awake, and notice movement in the shadows. It's not ghosts this time. It's your fellow sleepers, each following roles that the medieval world quietly assigned. Sleep, like everything else, was shaped by gender and duty. Tonight, you watch how men and women divided the night, their routines often pulling them from rest in different ways. Women, especially mothers, rarely slept uninterrupted. A baby's cry could summon them from slumber at any hour. You picture a woman rising wearily, cradling an infant by the fire, rocking gently while whispering a lullaby. Her body aches, but the rhythm of feeding and soothing becomes second nature. Other women tended to the sick, or kept an ear out for prowling animals near the door. Sleep for them was fragmented, stitched together between tasks of care. Men, on the other hand, often carried the role of nighttime guardians. If danger threatened, be it thieves, fire, or prowling wolves, it was men who reached for clubs or to torches. You imagine yourself stirring from a straw pallet, listening for strange noises, half ready to defend your cottage. Historians still argue whether this division was strictly followed or more fluid, depending on need. What's certain is that expectations weighed heavily, shaping whose rest was broken most often. A quirky tidbit. In some towns, unmarried women were forbidden from living alone at night, supposedly to protect their virtue and safety. This meant even sleep arrangements were tethered to gender rules, with widows or single women often sharing beds with relatives or servants. You can almost hear the sigh of a young woman forced to bunk with her aunt, wishing for just a little solitude. Class played into it, too. Noble women sometimes had attendants sleeping nearby, ready to wake if called. Their broken nights were less about crying babies and more about political demands or social rituals. A nobleman might summon a servant in the dark to deliver a message, his rest less interrupted by family and more by the machinery of power. Still, human needs cut across all lines. Men dozed off mid-watch, women found stolen moments of uninterrupted slumber, and children sprawled noisily across everyone's feet. In the end, the rhythms overlapped, weaving together in one noisy tapestry of nighttime life. You shift under your blanket, listening to the faint creak of the door, wondering if it's a mother tending a child or a father checking the yard. You sigh, realizing that in this world, sleep wasn't just personal. It was communal, divided, and shaped by invisible rules. You close your eyes again, lulled by the quiet shuffle of duties around you, grateful that at least for tonight, someone else is awake to keep watch while you drift back into dreams. You awake with a start, and for a moment you're not in a bed at all. Instead, you're on the cold floor of a damp chamber, wrists stiff, body aching. Not everyone in the medieval world drifted off in warm straw or cushioned feathers. Some spent their nights in punishment, where beds were as much about discomfort as they were about rest. Tonight, you're about to discover how peculiar those punishments could be. For minor offenses, a culprit might be locked in stocks or pillories overnight, their body exposed to the elements. You picture yourself slumped forward, head resting uncomfortably against wood, trying to steal a moment of sleep while your neck cramps. Passers-by might jeer or toss scraps, leaving you not only humiliated but miserably tired. Historians still argue whether these punishments were meant more for public shame or a practical correction. Either way, they guaranteed you weren't getting much shut-eye. Inside prisons, conditions were bleak. Some cells had no bedding at all, just bare stone floors. Others offered straw, damp and moldy, shared with rats. You roll onto your side, feel cold seeping into your bones, and wonder if you'd rather face the stocks outside. A quirky tidbit. Certain punishments involved iron frames or contraptions designed to keep the body from resting properly. One grim example was the wooden horse, where offenders were forced to straddle the sharp-edged beam, legs dangling, sometimes weighted with stones. Falling asleep wasn't just difficult, it was painful. You wince, grateful your current bed, lumpy as it is, doesn't come with splinters as a feature. Even less severe discipline carried strange sleep rules. In monasteries, disobedient monks might be ordered to sleep without blankets, left to shiver as both correction and reminder. You imagine pulling your thin tunic tighter, teeth chattering, resolving to behave better tomorrow. Yet not all peculiar beds were punitive. Some, oddly enough, were medical. Physicians occasionally prescribed iron frames or wooden contraptions to correct posture or realign humors. Now, whether they worked is debatable, but you can imagine patients lying stiffly, praying for the treatment to end. And sleep and punishment wasn't about rest, it was about endurance. You close your eyes on the damp stone, body aching, and marvel at how the simple act of lying down could be twisted into discomfort. The thought lingers as your breath slows. For some, medieval nights were not about dreams, but about surviving until morning. You stretch, trying to work the stiffness from your limbs, and notice that tonight, your bed feels oddly experimental. Medieval people didn't stop at straw and feathers. They tinkered, invented, and sometimes produced the strangest contraptions to make nights more bearable. You glance around and realize you're surrounded by forgotten sleep inventions, each more curious than the last. The simplest was the warming pan, a shallow metal container filled with hot coals, slid between sheets to take the chill off before bed. You picture yourself slipping beneath blankets, only to flinch at the faint scorch marks where someone left the pan in too long. Cozy, yes. Safe, not always. Historians still argue whether warming pans were blessings or fire hazards, but on a freezing night, you'd probably take the risk. Then there were wooden cradles for infants, rocked by tired parents with one foot while they dozed beside the hearth. The rhythmic creak was part lullaby, part white noise. You imagine yourself drifting to sleep to that sound, only to wake hours later realizing your foot is still rocking unconsciously. A quirky detail. Some cradles had wheels, so babies could be rolled gently across a floor, the medieval ancestor of the stroller and doubling as a bedtime gadget. Alarm devices also made appearances. One odd invention involved dripping water from a small vessel into a container below. When the bottom filled, the noise was meant to wake a sleeper, or at least signal the hour. You groan at the thought, realizing it's basically a medieval leaky faucet designed to rouse you at dawn. Practical if you don't mind dreaming of waterfalls. Beds themselves evolved, too. Wealthy households experimented with layered mattresses. Straw on the bottom, wool in the middle, feathers on top. You sink into one now, feeling oddly like a medieval parfait of comfort. Meanwhile, peasants got creative, stuffing sacks with leaves or moss when straw was scarce. You wrinkle your nose, imagining the smell of damp forest clinging to your sheets. One more oddity. Bed chairs. Contraptions that let people sleep sitting up. This wasn't just comfort, it tied into medical theories. Physicians sometimes recommended upright sleeping to balance humors or ease breathing. You try leaning back, neck stiff, and wonder if this was a relief or just another way to ruin your posture. Despite the oddities, these inventions show that medieval people like us longed for better rest. They experimented, improvised, and occasionally stumbled into brilliance. Weighted blankets, adjustable beds, sleep gadgets. Our modern trends have their echoes here. You lie back, warmed by a coal pan and cushioned by moss and feathers, grinning at the strange ingenuity of those who dreamed centuries before you. You stir, not because of dreams this time, but because of noise. The night around you is alive with sound. Bells tolling, dogs barking, footsteps echoing down narrow streets. You're no longer in a quiet cottage, but in the middle of a medieval town, where sleeping through the night was a challenge of its own. Cities were never silent. Watchmen patrolled the streets, calling out the hours or warnings of fire. You hear one now, his voice carrying through the darkness. Past midnight, and all's well. The reassurance is thin comfort when his shout jars you awake. Historians still argue whether watchmen were genuinely effective protectors or simply noisy nuisances, but either way, they kept sleepers from sinking too deep. Pigs and dogs roamed freely, rooting through refuse, knocking over barrels, and yapping at shadows. You groan, pulling a blanket over your head, only to discover that muffling one sound only sharpens the others. A quirky tidbit. In London, so many complaints arose about pigs disturbing the peace that ordinances were passed to keep them out of streets. Judging by the snorts outside your window, enforcement wasn't great. Then there were bells. Church bells, market bells, curfew bells. At night, a curfew bell often rang, reminding townsfolk to douse their fires and settle indoors. You imagine lying in bed, listening as the great iron tongue booms across rooftops, signaling not only bedtime, but the fragile safety of the locked gates. Noise wasn't all chaos, though. Some found comfort in the steady rhythm of footsteps, voices, and bells, a sign that life continued around them. You picture yourself dozing off to the faint hum of the city, as though the town itself were breathing alongside you. Still, when a drunkard stumbles down the alley, singing loudly and off-key, your illusion of calm shatters. The wealthy fared little better. Even in walled courtyards, sounds crept in, hooves clattering on cobblestones, hawkers calling early at dawn, or guards shifting at posts. Curtains muffled some of it, but stone walls carried echoes in strange, unsettling ways. You shift on your straw mattress, resigned to the fact that urban sleep was never quiet. Yet in its way, the din becomes part of the lullaby. Bells marking time, watchmen chanting, animals shuffling, neighbors muttering. You let the rhythm wash over you, surrendering to rest, not in spite of the noise, but through it, until even the barking dogs blur into background music. You wake again, not from noise or elbows, but from curiosity. Why did medieval people think they slept the way they did? Tonight you slide into the mind of a physician or scholar, peering through their lens of humors, vapors, and strange theories about the body at rest. Sleep wasn't just a biological need, it was a puzzle of balance and mystery. Medieval medicine leaned heavily on the theory of four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much of one caused imbalance, and sleep, or lack of it, was often blamed on this. If you slept too heavily, perhaps your body was weighed down with phlegm. If you tossed and turned, maybe heat from excess blood stirred restlessness. You lie back, amused, imagining your own tossing is simply too much yellow bile again. Physicians also believe vapors from food rose to the brain during digestion, making people drowsy. Heavy suppers meant sluggish mornings, while light meals led to easier sleep. Historians still argue whether this was pseudoscience or a surprisingly accurate observation of how diet affects rest. Either way, you smile, recalling how modern doctors still warn against late-night pizza. A quirky tidbit: some texts advise sleeping on your right side first, then switching to your left to aid digestion. You roll over obediently, trying to follow the medieval sleep manual, half convinced you will wake healthier just for obeying. Others recommended avoiding sleep right after bathing, fearing to let bad vapors seep too deeply into the body. So much for the medieval version of a warm bath before bed. Dreams, too, were wrapped into medical theory. Physicians described them as the brain's way of processing humors. If you dreamed of fire, perhaps your body was overheated. If of water, too cold or moist. You chuckle softly, remembering your cabbage-fueled dream of goats and crowns, and wondering which humor to blame for that one. The timing of sleep mattered as well. Scholars warned against lying in too long. Oversleeping was seen as weakening the body and dulling the mind. You sigh, guilty of many a Saturday morning spent defying that rule. On the other hand, too little sleep was thought to stir melancholy and shorten life. Balance was everything, a constant tug of war between too much and too little. You close your eyes again, picturing a physician with serious expression, quill scratching across parchment, prescribing lettuce for supper and a nap on your left side. Strange as it sounds, it's comforting. Even in their fumbling theories, medieval thinkers tried to make sense of the same mysteries we puzzle over today. Why we dream, why we toss, why some nights cradle us in peace while others keep us restless. You breathe out slowly, humor's balanced, or so you hope, and let their curious science rock you back towards sleep. You close your eyes again, and the line between history and legend begins to blur. Not all medieval sleep was ordinary, after all. Some nights carried whispers of enchanted rest, tales of kings, knights, and saints who slumbered for centuries. Tonight, as your body grows heavy, you slip into those stories where sleep itself becomes eternal. One of the most enduring was the legend of King Arthur. After his final battle, mortally wounded, he wasn't buried but carried to Avalon, where he would rest until his people needed him again. You imagine lying in a hidden chamber, surrounded by mist and apple trees, your body never aging, waiting for a horn to call you back. Historians still argue whether such legends were political propaganda, wishful thinking, or echoes of older pagan myths. But for those who told them, the idea of a king who only slept, not died, was a comfort. Christianity, too, wrapped sleep in holy symbolism. Death itself was often called the sleep of the just. Saints were described as resting peacefully even after martyrdom, their bodies untouched by decay. You picture pilgrims kneeling by a shrine, whispering prayers to a figure who seemed merely asleep, glowing in candlelight. A quirky tidbit. The tale of the Seven Sleepers of Ephesus, popular in medieval Europe, told of young men who hid in a cave during persecution and fell into a miraculous sleep for centuries. When they woke, the empire had turned Christian. You smile, imagining the confusion of the waking after such a nap, like dozing off before a long flight and waking to find the entire world changed. Other stories blurred the line between curse and gift. Nights bewitched into endless slumber, maidens lulled by spells, or entire castles caught in enchanted stillness. You wander through one such dreamscape now, halls silent, everyone frozen in repose, the only sound your own breathing. These legends soften the fear of death, offering the idea that rest might not be an ending but a pause. You sigh, comforted by the thought, and sink deeper into your own bed, whether straw, feather, or stone, letting timeless dreams enfold you. And now, as the last echoes of these tales fade, your body feels heavier, your breath slower. The stories have carried you across smoky cottages, noble chambers, noisy inns, and enchanted caves, but all of that begins to drift away now, like mist dissolving in morning light. The air feels softer. The rush of details, straw rustling, bells tolling, whispers of saints and spirits, melts into a single steady hush. You don't need to hold on to any of it. Let the weight of the blanket press gently across you, grounding you as if you're back in a bed-curtain cocoon. Picture yourself lying still, surrounded not by goats, monks, or wandering watchmen, but by silence. A silence that is warm, steady, protective. The kind that doesn't ask you to listen, only to rest. Every draft has been sealed, every creak softened, every shadow soothed into calm. Your thoughts wander slowly, like smoke rising from the last ember of a fire. They drift upward, stretch thin, and disappear into the cool night air. Even worries, those sharp little pebbles in the mind, become rounded, smooth, until they roll away out of reach. The rhythm of your breathing deepens, unhurried. Each inhale carries calm. Each exhale releases tension. The rise and fall of your chest becomes its own lullaby, one that asks for nothing, promises only peace. And if your mind stirs again, tugged by memory or dream, let it. Like the medieval watches rising at midnight, you can always return to rest when you are ready. Sleep is not a demand. It is a gentle invitation, always waiting. So surrender now to whatever dreams come. Let the centuries of voices hush into whispers and let the night cradle you into quiet, steady rest.